In the spring of 1241, the kingdoms of Europe believed the end of the world had arrived on horseback. Cities had burned across the lands of the Rus. A powerful army in Poland had been shattered. The king of Hungary had fled from a battlefield covered with broken banners, abandoned weapons, and the remains of men who had believed stone walls and armored knights would protect them. Now the road toward Vienna appeared open. The invaders did not look like the armies Europe knew. They traveled with several horses for every warrior. They crossed rivers that should have stopped them. They vanished before larger forces, then returned from directions no one expected. They sent scouts far ahead, mapped the land, divided their enemies, and struck with a speed that seemed impossible. They were called Mongols. But only a few generations earlier, there had been no Mongol Empire. There had been no great Khan commanding armies from China to the edge of Europe. There had been only scattered tribes on a vast and unforgiving steppe, fighting over animals, grazing land, marriage alliances, and survival. And at the center of that world was a boy whose enemies expected him to die. His father was poisoned. His people abandoned him. His family was left to starve. He was captured, chained inside a wooden collar, and watched by men who believed he would never escape. Yet that boy survived. He would unite enemies who had spent generations killing one another. He would build a military system that could destroy kingdoms before those kingdoms fully understood they were at war. His sons and grandsons would carry his banners across mountains, deserts, forests, and frozen rivers. They would create the largest contiguous land empire in history. They would also unleash destruction on a scale that left entire regions transformed for centuries. The story of the Mongol Empire is not simply the story of conquest. It is the story of how loyalty became more valuable than noble birth, how fear became a weapon, how trade routes became imperial highways, how women shaped successions from behind the walls of royal camps, how a family that conquered much of Eurasia was eventually divided by the very inheritance it had created. And it begins in a land where the horizon seemed endless. The Mongolian steppe was a world of grass, wind, bitter winters, and enormous distances. It offered little protection to the weak and few permanent boundaries for the powerful. The people who lived there depended on herds of horses, sheep, goats, cattle, and camels. Their homes were felt-covered tents that could be dismantled and carried. Their wealth moved with them. To outsiders, this life could appear simple. It was not. Survival required extraordinary skill. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. Men and women understood animals, weather, water, and distance in ways that settled people rarely needed to. A family could cross open country with no road and find a hidden spring. A rider could remain in the saddle for hours, change horses without stopping for long, and survive on food that could be carried for days. The steppe created mobility. Mobility created military power. But the same world also created division. Tribes formed alliances, broke them, and formed new ones. Leaders gained followers through family connections, generosity, marriage, victory, and reputation. A chief who could not reward his people might wake to find they had joined someone else. Blood feuds could last for years. Kidnapping brides was not unusual. A single insult could become a war. Into this world, sometime in the middle of the 12th century, a child named Temujin was born near the Onon River. The exact year remains uncertain. Later traditions often place his birth around 1162, but medieval sources do not agree. Even his birth became part of legend. One story claimed that he entered the world holding a clot of blood in his fist, a sign that he was destined to become a warrior. Whether anyone truly witnessed such a thing cannot be known. The story mattered because later generations needed the birth of a conqueror to look different from the birth of an ordinary child. His father was Yasugei, a minor but respected leader of the Borjigin lineage. His mother was Holan, a woman whose own life had already been shaped by the violence of the steppe. Before Temujin was born, Yasugei and his companions had seized her from another man. She was taken while traveling with her first husband, and she became Yasugei's wife. This was not a romantic beginning. It was an act of power. Years later, that act would return to Temujin's life in a way no one could ignore. As a boy, Temujin was taken by his father to the camp of another family. There, he was promised in marriage to a girl named Borte. Such arrangements were more than private unions. Marriage could connect families, secure alliances, and turn strangers into partners. Temujin remained for a time with Borte's people while Yasujii began the journey home. He never completed it. According to the traditional account, Yasujii encountered a group of Tatars who were holding a feast. The Tatars were old enemies. They recognized him and secretly poisoned his food. Yasujii managed to return to his camp, but he was dying. A messenger was sent to bring Temujin home. The boy who returned was not yet ready to lead, and the people who had followed his father knew it. After Yasujii's death, many members of the group abandoned Holan and her children. They took most of the family's animals and moved away, leaving the widow, her sons, and her young daughters without the protection of a strong clan. For Holan, grief had to wait. Survival could not. She gathered wild roots, berries, and plants. The family caught fish and small animals. They lived at the edge of starvation. The children who had once belonged to a leader's household now searched the ground for anything that could be eaten. This abandonment shaped Temujin more deeply than any victory later would. He learned that inherited status could vanish overnight. He learned that relatives could leave when loyalty became inconvenient. He learned that a leader who depended only on blood ties could be destroyed by those same ties. But hunger did not unite the family. It turned the struggle inward. Temujin had older half-brothers, including Bektur, the son of another wife of Yasujii. As the oldest male, Bektur could claim authority in the household. He also competed with Temujin and Temujin's full brother, Kasar, over food and control. The dispute ended in blood. Temujin and Kasar ambushed Bektur and killed him. Later accounts describe Holan's fury. Her sons had taken the life of their own brother when the family needed every hand to survive. The act reveals something uncomfortable about the future conqueror. Long before he commanded nations, Temujin was willing to answer a threat to his position with death. But the killing did not make him safe. The Taikyid, a powerful group connected to his father's former followers, saw the growing boy as a possible danger. Temujin was captured. A heavy wooden collar was fastened around his neck, preventing him from moving freely or escaping unnoticed. He was passed between families who watched him. To the Taikyid, he was a defeated orphan. To Temujin, captivity was only another problem that had to be survived. One night, during a gathering, he struck the boy assigned to guard him and fled. Still trapped in the wooden collar, he hid in water, leaving only his face above the surface. Searchers passed nearby. One man, traditionally remembered as Sorkinshira, saw him but did not expose him. Later, members of that man's family helped remove the collar and conceal the fugitive. Temujin escaped. He never forgot those who had helped him. That memory became part of his political method. When he later gained power, he rewarded people who had shown courage and loyalty when he was weak. Some were not nobles. Some came from enemy groups. Their value came from what they had done, not only from who their fathers had been. This did not make Temujin a modern believer in equality. He remained a ruler of a violent, aristocratic world. But compared with many steppe leaders, he repeatedly promoted capable followers from humble backgrounds. That choice would help create an army whose commanders owed their positions directly to him. Temujin now needed allies. He found one of the most important in a young man named Jamuka. The two became Anda, sworn brothers bound by a ritual relationship that could be as serious as blood kinship. They exchanged gifts, shared food, and promised loyalty. For a time, they rode together and imagined a future in which their strength would be joined. But Temujin also returned to claim the marriage arranged years earlier. Borte became his wife, and her family gave him a valuable black sable coat. In a world where wealth could be worn, carried, or ridden, the coat was more than clothing. It was a political gift. Temujin used it carefully. He presented the coat to Togrul, the powerful ruler of the Kharite people. Togrul had once been an ally of Yasujii. By honoring him with the coat and addressing him as a father, Temujin revived an old connection. Togrul accepted the relationship. Now the abandoned son of a dead minor chief had two major allies: Jamuka, his sworn brother, and Togrul, an experienced Khan. He would need both sooner than expected. One night, riders came for Borte. They were Merkit, members of the group from whom Holan had been taken years earlier. To them, the raid was revenge. Yasujii had stolen a Merkit bride. Now the Merkit would take the bride of Yasujii's son. Temujin escaped the attack, but Borte was captured. This moment could have destroyed him. Without Borte, he lost not only his wife, but also a vital political bond. A leader unable to protect his household could lose respect. And on the steppe, lost respect could become lost followers. Temujin did not attempt a reckless rescue alone. He went to Togrul. He went to Jamukha. He asked them to honor their alliances. They agreed. The combined forces attacked the Merkit camps and scattered them. Temujin moved through the confusion, calling Borte's name. According to the traditional story, she recognized his voice, ran from a cart, and seized the reins of his horse. They had found each other. But the rescue carried a question that would follow the family for generations. Borte had been held for months. Soon after her return, she gave birth to a son named Joki. Temujin publicly accepted Joki as his child. Yet doubts about the boy's paternity became a weapon within the family, especially when succession was discussed. No reliable evidence can settle the matter. What matters is that the accusation existed, and that Temujin's sons never completely escaped it. The rescue of Borte raised Temujin's reputation. Men began to gather around him. Some were relatives. Others were individuals who believed he could reward them. He offered protection, opportunity, and a place in a growing network that did not depend entirely on old tribal rank. Jamukha also had followers. But Jamukha represented a more traditional aristocratic order. The friendship between the two men now contained a hidden problem. Both could lead. Neither could remain second forever. For a time, their camps traveled together. Then came a separation described in the language of migration and pasture, but driven by politics. Jamukha suggested how the groups should divide their route. Temujin and Borte interpreted his words as a signal that the alliance was ending. During the night, Temujin's people moved away. Many families chose to follow Temujin. The sworn brothers had become rivals. At first, Jamukha was stronger. In an early battle, often associated with Dalan Baljit, Temujin was defeated. Later tradition accused Jamukha of executing captured enemies with terrible cruelty, including boiling some alive. The details may have been shaped by writers who wanted to contrast Jamukha's brutality with Temujin's justice. Yet the political meaning was clear. Jamukha inspired fear, but his punishments may also have driven people toward his rival. Temujin survived the defeat. That became one of his greatest strengths. He did not need to win every encounter. He needed to remain alive long enough to learn from failure. He studied why men followed, why they deserted, and why coalitions collapsed. He understood that steppe armies were often temporary collections of proud nobles, each commanding his own relatives. Such forces could be powerful, but they could also break apart when leaders quarreled. Temujin began building something different. He demanded loyalty to himself above loyalty to tribe. He divided captured peoples and distributed them among new units, weakening old identities. He promoted men for ability. A shepherd could rise. A blacksmith's son could command. A former enemy could become a trusted general if he proved reliable. Among the men who entered his service was Jeeb. During a battle, an arrow struck Temujin's horse. Afterward, Temujin asked who had fired it. A captured warrior admitted the shot was his. Instead of killing him, Temujin admired his honesty and skill. He renamed him Jeeb, often understood as Arrow, and made him a commander. Jeeb would later lead one of the most extraordinary cavalry campaigns in history. Another commander, Subutai, came from a family without the highest aristocratic standing. He would become a master of long-distance strategy, coordinating armies separated by mountains and hundreds of miles. Temujin was not simply collecting warriors. He was collecting talent. And slowly, the balance of the steppe began to change. The struggle for the steppe did not move in a straight line. Alliances changed. Former enemies became partners. Old partners became threats. Temujin's rise depended not only on battle, but on his ability to survive the politics surrounding every battle. One of his greatest advantages remained Togrul, the Karaite ruler whom Temujin treated as a father. Together, they fought against rival groups, including the Tatars who had long been blamed for the death of Yasujii. The Jin dynasty of northern China also used steppe rivalries for its own purposes, rewarding some groups and attacking others to prevent any single power from becoming too strong. For a time, Temujin accepted this game. Then he began to master it. The Tatars were defeated. Temujin ordered severe punishment for the adult males of the enemy group, according to the accounts preserved in Mongol tradition. The exact scale is impossible to establish, but the purpose was unmistakable. The Tatars were not merely to be beaten. Their ability to return as an independent political force was to be broken. Yet Temujin also absorbed survivors into his growing nation. This pattern would repeat throughout his career. Resistance could bring annihilation. Submission could bring a place inside the new order. That combination of terror and inclusion became one of the foundations of Mongol expansion. The relationship with Togrul eventually collapsed. Success had made Temujin useful, but it had also made him dangerous. Kharait nobles feared that the younger leader was becoming too powerful. Marriage negotiations increased the tension. Accusations spread. Plans were made in secret. Temujin learned that Togrul's people were preparing to attack him. Once again, the future conqueror found himself close to destruction. The Kharait struck, and Temujin's forces suffered. He withdrew with a reduced group of followers. The man who had once seemed destined to rule the steppe now appeared nearly finished. According to later tradition, he shared what little food remained with the men who had stayed beside him. Whether every detail is exact matters less than the memory the story preserved. Temujin's authority was built during moments when loyalty cost something. He recovered. Then he moved against Togrul with speed and secrecy. The Kharait were defeated. Togrul fled and was killed by men who did not recognize him. His people were divided and absorbed. The father figure had become another fallen rival. Genghis still remained. By now, the conflict between the sworn brothers represented two possible futures for the steppe. Genghis was supported by many traditional aristocrats who feared Temujin's challenge to inherited privilege. Temujin drew strength from men whose fortunes depended on his new system. The final major obstacle was the Naiman Confederation in the west. Its ruler gathered enemies of Temujin, including Genghis and other displaced nobles. The Naiman controlled rich pastures and important routes. Their defeat would leave no comparable rival in Mongolia. Before the battle, Temujin used deception. His army was believed to be smaller. To create the appearance of enormous numbers, the Mongols lit multiple campfires for each group. From a distance, the Naiman saw the hills covered in flames. Fear began working before the fighting started. In 1204, Temujin defeated the Naiman. Their ruler died. Their political structure collapsed. Many of their people entered Temujin's service, including educated officials who would help transform a coalition of riders into an empire. Genghis escaped, but not for long. Eventually, several of his own followers delivered him to Temujin. The act presented Temujin with a test. The men who betrayed Genghis expected a reward. Instead, Temujin had them executed for betraying their lord. Loyalty, even to an enemy, was treated as more honorable than treachery for profit. Genghis and Temujin met for the final time. Later tradition gives them a dramatic conversation. Genghis is said to have refused reconciliation, knowing there could not be two suns in one sky. He asked for a noble death without the spilling of blood. The exact words may be literary, shaped long after the moment. But the ending fits the world they had created together. The sworn brothers who once shared blankets and dreams could not share power. Genghis died. In 1206, leaders from across the United Steppe gathered at a great assembly, a Kurultai, near the Onon River. There, Temujin received the title by which history would remember him, Genghis Khan, commonly rendered in English as Genghis Khan. The precise meaning of the title remains debated. It suggested universal authority, a ruler whose command extended beyond a single tribe. The abandoned child was now the supreme ruler of the Mongols. But the name Mongol itself was changing. It no longer referred only to one limited group. Under Genghis Khan, it became an imperial identity imposed over many tribes and peoples. Old units were broken apart. Families from defeated groups were redistributed. The population was reorganized into a decimal military and social structure. Groups of 10 formed the smallest units. 10 of those formed 100. 10 hundreds formed 1,000. 10 thousands formed a tumon. The numbers were not always exact in practice, but the structure created clear chains of command. A warrior did not simply ride beside his cousins under a hereditary chief. He belonged to a unit with defined obligations. Commanders were responsible for the performance of those beneath them. Desertion and disobedience could bring severe punishment. Discipline allowed Mongol armies to perform maneuvers that looked like chaos to their enemies, but were carefully controlled. The most famous was the feigned retreat. Mongol riders would attack, appear to lose courage, and flee. An enemy convinced that victory had arrived would pursue. Formation would break. Horses would tire. Commanders would lose contact with one another. Then the retreating Mongols would turn, while hidden forces struck from the sides. What looked like panic was often a trap. This tactic was not invented by Genghis Khan. Steppe peoples had used versions of it for centuries. His achievement was to make such methods part of a disciplined system operating on an imperial scale. Mongol warfare depended on the horse, but not on one horse alone. A warrior might travel with several remounts, changing between them to preserve their strength. This allowed armies to cover extraordinary distances. The riders carried bows powerful enough to kill at range, lances for close combat, ropes, tools, and food that required little preparation. The composite bow was made from materials such as wood, horn, and sinew. It was compact enough for use from horseback and deadly in trained hands. Riders could shoot while moving, turning in the saddle as the horse carried them away. But the Mongols were not invincible because of a single weapon. Their greatest weapon was coordination. Scouts moved far ahead. Intelligence was collected from merchants, prisoners, defectors, and local guides. The Mongols learned the roads, rivers, rivalries, and weaknesses of a region before committing their main forces. Armies separated across huge distances could converge at an agreed place and time. Generals were given broad objectives and trusted to adapt. Genghis Khan's commanders also learned from conquered peoples. The Mongols were nomadic cavalrymen, but many of the richest states in the world were protected by walls. Against such cities, horses and arrows were not enough. So the Mongols recruited engineers. Chinese, Khitan, Persian, Central Asian, and other specialists built siege engines, dug trenches, redirected rivers, launched stones, and helped armies cross difficult terrain. The empire did not defeat every civilization by using only Mongol methods. It became powerful by taking the knowledge of one conquered region and carrying it to the next. This ability to absorb expertise was central to the empire. A skilled craftsman might be spared when a city fell, then transported hundreds or thousands of miles to serve a Mongol ruler. Scribes were used to keep records. Doctors treated the elite. Astronomers advised courts. Translators moved between languages. Administrators collected taxes from societies far more complex than the steppe. The Mongols could be brutally destructive, but they were rarely uninterested in usefulness. Genghis Khan established a bodyguard and household institution known as the kashig. It served not only as personal protection, but also as a school of imperial service. Sons of commanders and allied leaders could be brought into the ruler's household, where they learned discipline and formed bonds that crossed tribal lines. He also adopted writing for administration. The Uyghurs, whose educated elite entered Mongol service, provided a script adapted for the Mongolian language. Orders could now be recorded. Tax demands, appointments, and diplomatic messages could travel with greater authority. Later writers associated Genghis Khan with a great legal code, often called the Yasa. It is clear that he issued laws and commands, and that Mongol rulers valued discipline. But no complete original text of a single fixed code survives. Some claims made about the Yasa come from later authors and should be treated cautiously. What can be seen is a consistent imperial priority: obedience, military readiness, protection of envoys, punishment of theft within the army, and loyalty to the ruling house. Religious policy also served unity. The Mongols followed steppe spiritual traditions centered on eternal heaven, ancestral forces, and ritual specialists often described as shamans. Yet Genghis Khan generally allowed conquered peoples and followers to practice their own religions. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others could serve the empire. Religious figures were sometimes granted privileges or tax exemptions. This tolerance was not based on modern ideas of personal rights. It was practical and political. Genghis Khan wanted the support of heaven, and he did not assume that wisdom belonged to only one tradition. He questioned religious leaders, sought blessings, and avoided turning diverse subjects into unnecessary enemies. The empire would later include mosques, churches, Buddhist temples, and other sacred places under Mongol protection. At the same time, religious communities could still suffer when cities resisted Mongol armies. Tolerance at court did not prevent destruction in war. This contradiction would define much of Mongol rule. The new state also depended on fear. When a city surrendered quickly, its population might be spared, taxed, and used. When a city resisted, killed envoys, or forced the Mongols into a long siege, punishment could be catastrophic. Survivors carried stories to the next city. Sometimes those stories were exaggerated. That exaggeration served Mongol interests. The goal was to win before the attack began. A ruler who believed resistance meant total destruction might open his gates. A governor who feared the population would surrender might flee. Neighboring cities could become divided between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to live. The Mongols turned reputation into strategy. Yet in 1206, the empire was still small compared with what it would become. Genghis Khan had united Mongolia, but beyond the steppes stood wealthy states with cities, bureaucracies, and armies far larger than his own. To the south lay the Western Xia kingdom, ruled by the Tangut people. Beyond it stood the Jin dynasty, which controlled northern China. Farther south, the Song dynasty governed one of the richest and most advanced societies on earth. These were not scattered tribes. They had fortified cities, organized taxation, infantry armies, cavalry, crossbows, siege weapons, and centuries of political experience. Genghis Khan looked south. The steppe had made him a Khan. China would test whether he could become an emperor. The first campaigns against Western Xia allowed the Mongols to learn siege warfare. The Tangut kingdom controlled important routes and oasis cities. Its lands lay along the edge of desert and mountain, where cavalry alone could not guarantee success. The Mongols raided, withdrew, returned, and gradually increased pressure. During one siege, they reportedly tried to redirect a river against a capital city, only for the waters to threaten their own camp. The episode, preserved in later accounts, revealed both their ambition and inexperience. Western Xia eventually submitted and promised support. Genghis Khan then turned toward the Jin. The Jin dynasty was ruled by the Jurchen, a people with their own northern frontier origins who had conquered large parts of China. They governed millions of subjects and possessed resources far beyond anything in Mongolia. For generations, Jin rulers had manipulated steppe politics to keep nomadic groups divided. Now those divisions had been united against them. In 1211, the Mongols crossed into Jin territory. The campaign was not one simple charge. Genghis Khan divided his forces, attacked multiple points, bypassed some fortifications, and used defectors who understood the Jin system. Mongol cavalry devastated the countryside and isolated cities from one another. At the Battle of Yehuling, Jin forces suffered a major defeat. The exact numbers given in medieval accounts are often unreliable, but the strategic result was clear. The northern defenses had been broken. The Jin court faced a terrifying reality. Its enemy could move faster than information. By the time one city learned another had fallen, Mongol columns could already be approaching. The Mongols also benefited from internal resentment. The Jin ruled over many ethnic Chinese and other subjects who did not always feel loyalty to the dynasty. Officials defected. Soldiers surrendered. Engineers entered Mongol service. Genghis Khan did not need to create every tool required to conquer the Jin. He needed to persuade, force, or frighten the people who already possessed those tools to work for him. In 1215, after a long struggle, the Jin capital of Zhongdu, near modern Beijing, fell to the Mongols. The city had endured siege, hunger, and political collapse. Its capture brought immense wealth and terrible destruction. For the riders from the steppe, the riches of a Chinese capital must have seemed almost beyond imagination. Palaces, workshops, metal, silk, grain, books, and skilled labor stood inside walls larger than many had ever seen. But conquest created a new question. How could a nomadic ruling house control millions of settled people? Some Mongol commanders saw northern China primarily as land to be plundered or turned into pasture. Officials with experience in Chinese administration argued that living taxpayers were more valuable than empty fields. One of the most important advisors associated with this argument was Yelu Chukai, a Khitan scholar who later served Genghis Khan and especially his successor. The transformation was slow and incomplete. Mongol armies continued to destroy cities. Yet imperial leaders began learning that conquest and government were different skills. They had mastered the first. The second would determine whether their victories survived them. Then, while war against the Jin continued, a new frontier opened far to the west. It began not with an invasion, but with trade. Beyond the deserts and mountains of Central Asia stood the Khwarezmian Empire, ruled by Shah Muhammad II. His realm stretched across much of modern Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and neighboring regions. It contained famous cities, wealthy markets, irrigated farmland, and trade routes connecting the Islamic world with China. The Khwarezmian state looked powerful. It was also politically fragile. The Shah had expanded rapidly, but many local rulers resented him. His mother, Turkin Khatan, commanded her own network of influence. Military commanders were not always united. Provinces had been conquered more quickly than they had been integrated. Genghis Khan did not initially approach this empire as an enemy. After Mongol forces under Jib defeated the ruler of Karakaitai, the Mongol frontier reached the borders of Khwarezm. Genghis sent messages describing the Shah as ruler of the West while presenting himself as ruler of the East. He proposed trade. A large caravan traveled into Khwarezmian territory carrying valuable goods. At the city of Otrar, the governor, Inalchuk, accused the merchants of spying. The caravan was seized, and its members were killed, though accounts differ about the details and the number of survivors. Genghis Khan did not immediately declare war. He sent envoys to Shah Muhammad, demanding that the governor be surrendered for punishment. The Shah chose defiance. One envoy was killed. Others were humiliated and sent back. For the Mongols, the protection of envoys was a central principle. Diplomacy depended on the belief that a messenger could cross enemy territory and return. To murder an envoy was not only an insult to Genghis Khan. It was an attack on the mechanism through which surrender might be negotiated. The Shah had made a decision whose consequences he did not understand. Genghis Khan prepared for war. The invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire began in 1219. Medieval chroniclers give enormous and contradictory numbers for both armies. Modern historians continue to debate the scale. What is certain is that the Mongols were probably outnumbered by the total manpower available to the Shah, but the Khwarezmian forces were scattered across fortified cities. Shah Muhammad feared concentrating his army in one place. He distributed troops among major urban centers, hoping walls would slow the invaders. This gave Genghis Khan exactly what he wanted. Instead of facing one massive army, the Mongols could isolate cities and destroy them one by one. They advanced in several columns. One force moved toward Otrar, the city where the caravan had been killed. Others crossed routes considered nearly impossible for a large army. Genghis Khan led men through the Kizilkum Desert, appearing behind the Khwarezmian defenses where he was least expected. The Shah's commanders had watched the obvious roads. The Mongols came through emptiness. Otrar resisted for months. Its governor knew surrender was unlikely to save him. The city eventually fell after internal division and brutal fighting. Inalchuk was captured and executed. Later stories claimed molten silver was poured into his eyes or ears, but this dramatic detail is not securely supported by the earliest evidence. The truth required no embellishment. The governor who had seized the caravan was dead, and his city had been destroyed. Genghis Khan moved toward Bokhara. Bokhara was one of the great cities of Central Asia, a center of religion, learning, trade, and architecture. Its defenders were unprepared for an army that had crossed the desert. The outer garrison withdrew or was defeated. The city surrendered, though troops continued resisting inside the citadel. A famous speech is attributed to Genghis Khan after he entered Bokhara, in which he declared himself a punishment from God for the sins of the people. The wording comes through later chroniclers and may not preserve his exact voice. Yet it captures how the conquest was remembered, not as an ordinary war, but as a judgment descending from beyond the known political order. The citadel fell. Valuable specialists were selected. Others were taken for forced labor or used in future sieges. The city was looted and damaged. Then came Samarkand. Shah Muhammad had placed a large garrison there, including cavalry and war elephants. But numbers inside walls did not guarantee unity. Some defenders surrendered. Others attempted to break out. The Mongols surrounded the city, used prisoners and local labor, and maintained pressure until resistance collapsed. Samarkand fell with shocking speed. The Shah did not remain to defend his empire. He fled westward, pursued by Mongol commanders Jib and Subutai. Their mission was not simply to follow him. It was to deny him the time to gather another army. The pursuit crossed an extraordinary distance. Shah Muhammad moved through Iran toward the Caspian Sea. His authority dissolved behind him. Governors made their own decisions. Cities surrendered or prepared to resist. The ruler of a vast empire became a fugitive. He eventually died on an island in the Caspian, ill and stripped of power. His son, Jalal al-Din, refused to disappear so easily. Jalal al-Din was energetic, courageous, and capable of inspiring soldiers. He assembled a force in Afghanistan and won a victory against a Mongol army at Parwan. It was one of the rare serious defeats suffered by Mongol forces during the campaign. But victory exposed division among Jalal al-Din's commanders. Arguments over captured horses and status caused important allies to leave. The army that might have become the center of resistance weakened itself. Genghis Khan pursued Jalal al-Din toward the Indus River. In 1221, the two forces met near the riverbank. Jalal al-Din fought fiercely but was overwhelmed. With capture approaching, he rode his horse from a high bank into the Indus and escaped across the water. Tradition says Genghis Khan watched and praised the courage of his enemy, telling his sons that a father should have such a son. The scene may have been polished by storytellers, but Jalal al-Din's escape became legendary. He survived. His empire did not. The Mongol conquest of Khwarezm was accompanied by destruction so severe that later writers struggled to describe it without using impossible numbers. Cities such as Merv, Nishapur, and Urgench became symbols of catastrophe. Medieval sources claim hundreds of thousands, or even more than 1 million deaths in individual places. Such figures are not credible as precise counts. Chroniclers often used enormous numbers to express horror rather than provide modern statistics. But rejecting the numbers does not mean rejecting the devastation. Populations were killed, displaced, or enslaved. Irrigation networks were damaged in some regions. Agricultural land declined. Skilled workers were deported. Political institutions disappeared. Families fled along roads filled with refugees. The destruction varied. Some cities surrendered and survived more successfully. Some recovered within decades. Others were changed for much longer. The Mongol conquest was not a single uniform wave, but where resistance was fierce or Mongol nobles were killed, punishment could be extreme. At Nishapur, the death of a Mongol commander who was married to a daughter of Genghis Khan was followed by a massacre remembered with particular horror. At Bamiyan, a grandson of Genghis Khan was killed during the siege, and the population suffered brutal retaliation. War had become personal. The farther the Mongols moved from Mongolia, the more they depended on the terror created by previous victories. Every city did its own calculation. Surrender might preserve life, but promises were not always trusted. Resistance might offer honor, but it could bring destruction. Flight might save a family, but roads were dangerous and food uncertain. The Mongol advance forced millions of people to make choices with no safe answer. Meanwhile, Jebe and Subutai continued beyond the original theater of war. After the death of Shah Muhammad, they received permission to conduct a vast reconnaissance through the Caucasus and the western steppe. They moved through northern Iran, crossed mountain passes, and confronted a changing collection of peoples: Georgians, Alans, Cumans, and others. They used diplomacy to divide coalitions. When the Alans and Cumans joined against them, the Mongols reminded the Cumans that both were peoples of the steppe. Gifts and promises persuaded the Cumans to abandon their allies. The Mongols then defeated the isolated Alans. Afterward, they turned on the Cumans. This pattern was devastatingly effective. Separate the enemy. Destroy one half. Then destroy the other. The fleeing Cumans appealed to the princes of the Rus. A coalition gathered to meet the unknown force approaching from the east. The Rus princes did not operate under a single command. Rivalries shaped their decisions. Some wanted to attack immediately. Others hesitated. The Mongols sent envoys claiming they had no quarrel with the Rus and were only pursuing the Cumans. The envoys were killed. Once again, diplomacy ended in blood. In 1223, the armies met near the Kalka River. The Mongols withdrew for days, drawing the coalition deeper into the steppe. Rus forces became stretched out. Units lost contact. When the Mongols turned, the coalition could not support itself. The defeat was crushing. Several Rus princes were captured. A later account describes them being placed beneath wooden boards while Mongol leaders held a victory feast above, killing the captives without spilling noble blood. The precise details are debated, but the event entered memory as a warning. Then the Mongols disappeared eastward. They had not come to conquer the Rus permanently. Geb and Subutai had conducted a reconnaissance on a continental scale, testing routes and enemies that future Mongol armies would later attack. Europe had received its first glimpse of the storm. It misunderstood what it had seen. The princes of the Rus returned to their rivalries. The Cumans continued moving and fighting. To many, the strange riders from the east had been a temporary disaster. They did not yet realize that the Mongols collected information across generations. Subutai remembered the rivers. He remembered the roads. He remembered how the Rus princes failed to cooperate. He would return. Genghis Khan, meanwhile, began the long movement back toward Mongolia. His empire now stretched across a massive part of Asia, but he had unfinished business in the south. Western Xia had promised military assistance during the Khwarezmian campaign and had not provided it. The Tangut kingdom also appeared to be testing its independence. Genghis Khan prepared another campaign. By this time he was an aging ruler, probably in his 60s. He had spent much of his life in the saddle. He had survived hunger, captivity, betrayal, arrows, and years of war. Yet there was still no secure system guaranteeing that his sons would preserve what he had built. The question of succession had already produced conflict. Borte had given birth to 4 principal sons: Joki, Chagatai, Ögedei, and Talyui. Each had strengths. Each had followers. Each carried a claim through the ruling family. Joki was the eldest, but the old doubts surrounding his birth remained. Chagatai openly challenged his legitimacy. During a family discussion, the brothers nearly came to violence. Genghis Khan intervened, defending Borte's honor and insisting that Joki was his son. Yet the damage could not be erased. Chagatai was known for strictness and energy, but his conflict with Joki made him a dangerous choice. Talyui, the youngest, was a skilled warrior and according to steppe custom would inherit his father's homeland and household. But the position of Great Khan required broad agreement. Ögedei emerged as the compromise. He was considered generous, politically flexible, and capable of working with his brothers. Genghis Khan designated him as successor, though the final election would still require a Kurultai. The decision avoided one immediate crisis. It did not end the rivalry between branches of the family. Joki died before his father, probably in 1227, though the exact date and circumstances remain uncertain. Relations between Joki and Genghis Khan had become strained. Joki had spent time in the western territories assigned to him and may have resisted orders to return. Later rumors suggested he had rebelled or even been killed on his father's command, but there is no firm evidence. His death left his sons, especially Batu and Orda, to inherit the western branch of the family. That branch would one day rule the Golden Horde. During the final campaign against Western Xia, Genghis Khan became seriously ill. The cause of his death is unknown. Sources offer different explanations: injuries from a fall from a horse, illness, wounds, or later legends involving a Tangut princess. None can be accepted with certainty. In August 1227, Genghis Khan died. The army concealed the news until the campaign was completed. Western Xia was defeated, its ruling house destroyed, and its territory absorbed. The conqueror did not live to see the final result announced. His body was taken back toward Mongolia. What happened next became one of history's great mysteries. Tradition holds that Genghis Khan was buried in a secret place, probably somewhere in the region of the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountain. Stories claim that witnesses were killed, that horses trampled the ground, or that a river was diverted to hide the grave. These details belong more to legend than verifiable history. No confirmed tomb has ever been found. Perhaps that was appropriate. Genghis Khan had spent his life turning movement into power. A monumental stone tomb would have tied him to a single place. Instead, his burial vanished into the landscape that had made him. When he died, the Mongol Empire was already enormous. It included Mongolia, much of Central Asia, parts of northern China, and lands reaching toward the Caspian Sea. Yet the empire known to history, the empire that would reach Korea, Baghdad, Russia, Hungary, and the borders of Egypt, was still unfinished. Genghis Khan had created the machine. His children would decide how far it could travel. For nearly 2 years after his death, Talyui acted as regent while the ruling family prepared the succession. Then, in 1229, the princes gathered and elected Ögedei as Great Khan. The new ruler inherited more than territory. He inherited an expectation. The conquests could not stop. Ögedei did not look exactly like the man who had united the steppe. He was less severe in manner, more willing to delegate, and famous for generosity. He was also known for heavy drinking, a habit that would damage his health and eventually shape the future of the empire. But it would be a mistake to see him as a weak successor. Under Ögedei, the Mongol Empire became more organized, more urban, and even larger. Genghis Khan had created a conquering confederation. Ögedei began turning it into a functioning imperial system. He established a capital at Karakorum in the Orkhon Valley. By the standards of China, Persia, or the Islamic world, Karakorum was not a vast city. But for the Mongol ruling house, it was a political center unlike anything that had existed before. Artisans, merchants, envoys, officials, and religious figures gathered there from across Eurasia. The city reflected the empire itself. Mosques, churches, Buddhist institutions, workshops, palaces, and markets stood near one another. Languages from distant regions could be heard in the same streets. Captured craftsmen produced luxury goods for rulers whose ancestors had lived almost entirely in tents. The Mongols did not abandon mobility. The imperial court still traveled seasonally, and the Khan's great encampment remained central to political life. But Karakorum gave the empire a place where tribute, diplomacy, and administration could meet. Ögedei also expanded the relay network known as the Yam. Stations were established along major routes with fresh horses, food, and shelter. Authorized messengers carried tablets or passes that identified their right to demand assistance. News and commands could move across distances that would have paralyzed most medieval states. The system was expensive. Local populations had to supply animals and provisions. Abuse by officials became a problem. Ögedei issued measures intended to regulate demands and protect the network from collapse. The Yam was more than a postal road. It was the nervous system of the empire. A command issued near Karakorum could travel toward China, Central Asia, or the Western Steppe. Reports of rebellion could return. Envoys could cross territories where local rulers knew that harming them might bring imperial punishment. Taxation also became more systematic. Advisors such as Yelu Chukai urged the Mongol elite to count households, collect predictable revenue, and preserve the agricultural population. The principle was simple. A destroyed village could be looted once. A living village could be taxed every year. The lesson did not eliminate violence. It did encourage government. Ögedei ordered campaigns in several directions. The war against the Jin dynasty continued. Mongol forces coordinated with the Southern Song, which saw an opportunity to destroy its old Jin enemy. In 1234, the last Jin emperor died as his state collapsed. The Jin dynasty was gone. The Song expected to recover northern territories. Instead, it found that cooperation with the Mongols had removed one enemy and created a more dangerous one. Campaigns also extended into Korea, Persia, the Caucasus, and other regions. Yet the most dramatic decision of Ögedei's reign concerned the West. At a great council in 1235, the Mongol princes approved a massive expedition into the lands beyond the Volga. Officially, the campaign would be led by Batu, son of Joki and grandson of Genghis Khan. In practice, its strategic mind was Subutai, the veteran commander who had already crossed the Caucasus and defeated the Rus at the Kalka River. This was not a raid. It was a planned conquest. Princes from multiple branches of the imperial family joined the expedition. They brought armies from across the empire. Engineers and subject troops accompanied the cavalry. The Mongols were returning with knowledge gathered during the earlier reconnaissance. Their first major target was Volga Bulgaria, a wealthy state controlling trade along the river. The Bulgars had resisted earlier Mongol advances. Now they faced the full power of the Western expedition. By 1236, their state was broken. Then the Mongols turned toward the principalities of the Rus. The Rus lands were divided among rival princes. Their cities were fortified, their warriors experienced, and their political culture proud. But unity remained elusive. Some princes had fought beside one another at the Kalka River. The memory of that defeat had not created a durable common command. In the winter of 1237, Mongol forces approached Ryazan. Envoys demanded submission and tribute. The people of Ryazan refused. Appeals for help went out to neighboring princes, but support did not arrive in time. The city was surrounded. After several days of siege, Ryazan fell. The destruction was severe. Later Rus chronicles remembered the event as a national tragedy, describing fire, killing, and the loss of entire families. The Mongols advanced through winter when frozen rivers became roads. Snow and cold that might have stopped other armies did not stop riders trained for the steppe. Kolomna fell. Moscow, then a smaller settlement, was captured and burned. Vladimir, one of the leading cities of the northeast, was attacked. Members of the ruling family died as the city fell. The Grand Prince attempted to gather an army farther north. Mongol forces found and defeated it at the Sit River. One city, Kozulsk, resisted so fiercely that Mongol tradition later remembered it as an evil city. Its defenders held for weeks, reportedly inflicting heavy losses before it was destroyed. The campaign was not unstoppable in every direction. Novgorod escaped direct conquest, probably because spring conditions, forests, mud, distance, and strategic priorities made further advance unattractive. The city later accepted Mongol political supremacy without suffering the same fate as many southern centers. The Mongols moved back toward the steppe, reorganized, and returned. In 1240, they attacked Kiev. Kiev had once stood at the center of the Rus world. By the 13th century, its political importance had declined, but its symbolic and religious importance remained immense. Its churches and monasteries represented generations of Christian civilization. Mongol envoys demanded surrender. The city refused. Siege engines battered the defenses. The walls were breached. Fighting moved through the streets. People sought refuge in churches. The city fell in December 1240. Kiev survived, but it was devastated. The road into Central Europe now opened. Subutai designed a campaign that divided the Mongol army into several columns. One would move through Poland, preventing Polish and Bohemian forces from joining Hungary. The main army under Batu and Subutai would enter the Hungarian kingdom through the Carpathian passes. Other forces would approach from different directions. Europe's rulers saw separate invasions. Subutai saw one operation. The Mongols had reasons to attack Hungary. Cuman refugees fleeing the western steppe had been allowed to enter the kingdom. Bata demanded that King Bela IV surrender them, claiming the Cumans were Mongol subjects. Bela refused. Hungary was also one of the largest and strongest kingdoms in the region. If it fell, Mongol forces could operate from its plains and threaten the lands beyond. In Poland, a Mongol column attacked and withdrew repeatedly, confusing defenders and preventing concentration. Krakow was abandoned and burned. A coalition gathered under Duke Henry the Pious of Silesia, joined by knights and soldiers from several regions. On April 9, 1241, they met the Mongols near Legnica. The European army fought with courage, but coordination failed. Smoke, feigned retreat, and fast maneuver disrupted its formations. Duke Henry was killed. His army was destroyed as an effective force. The Mongol purpose in Poland was not necessarily permanent occupation. It was strategic isolation. 2 days later, the main battle took place in Hungary. King Bela's army had established a camp near the Sejo River, close to a bridge at a place called Mohi. The Hungarians expected the river to protect them. Subutai crossed elsewhere, possibly using a temporary bridge, while Batu attacked near the main crossing. The first Mongol assault faced strong resistance. This was not an effortless victory, but as forces crossed at multiple points, the Hungarian camp became surrounded. The Mongols bombarded the crowded position with arrows and projectiles. A gap was left in the encirclement. To desperate soldiers, it appeared to offer escape. Many fled through it. The opening became a killing ground as Mongol riders pursued the disorganized survivors. The Hungarian army collapsed. King Bela escaped. The kingdom did not. Mongol forces spread across the Hungarian plain. Towns and villages were attacked. Some fortified places resisted successfully, especially stronger stone castles. Much of the population suffered from battle, flight, hunger, and disruption. Contemporary descriptions convey devastation, though exact losses remain uncertain. For the rest of 1241, the Mongols operated across Hungary. During the winter, they crossed the frozen Danube, a barrier that had protected western parts of the kingdom. They pursued Bela toward the Adriatic coast. Raiding forces entered Croatia and reached areas near the sea. Europe waited for the next attack. Then, in early 1242, the Mongols began to withdraw. For centuries, the most famous explanation was the death of Ögedei Khan in December 1241. According to this view, the princes had to return east for the election of a new great Khan. Ögedei's death certainly mattered. A succession struggle was beginning, and members of the royal family could not ignore it. Yet the withdrawal was probably caused by more than one factor. Batu did not immediately travel to Mongolia. The Mongols had encountered difficult terrain, a landscape filled with rivers, marshes, and an increasing number of stone fortifications. Horses required enormous grazing areas. What conditions may have reduced available pasture? Resistance continued in several places. The campaign had won spectacular battles, but permanent occupation of densely fortified Europe would demand a different effort. The Mongols were not frightened away by one heroic army, nor were they magically defeated by weather alone. Their withdrawal was a strategic decision shaped by succession politics, environment, logistics, and the changing value of the campaign. Europe survived, but it had not defeated the Mongol Empire. Batu established his power in the western steppe along the lower Volga. His capital at Sarai became the center of a state later known as the Golden Horde. The name came into wider use after the period of initial conquest, but it describes the western Mongol realm ruled by the descendants of Jochi. The Rus principalities now lived under Mongol supremacy. Princes traveled to the Khan's court to receive confirmation of their authority. Tribute was collected. Rebellion could bring punitive campaigns. The Mongols did not usually govern every Rus town directly. They ruled through local princes, tax systems, military threats, and political approval. This allowed them to control a vast forested region without replacing all existing institutions. Some princes resisted. Others cooperated. Many did both at different moments. Alexander Nevsky, later remembered as a Russian hero for resisting Western enemies, accepted Mongol authority and worked within the system. His choices reflected the terrible balance of the age. The Mongols represented overwhelming force from the east. Catholic powers threatened from the west. Survival required deciding which danger could be fought and which had to be endured. The Golden Horde would influence the politics of the Rus for generations. It also became a major center of trade, connecting the Black Sea, the Volga, Central Asia, and routes toward China. But as Batu consolidated power in the west, the death of Ögedei opened a struggle at the center of the empire. Ögedei had attempted to limit his drinking, reportedly promising to reduce the number of cups he consumed. The size of the cups grew instead. In December 1241, after a night of heavy drinking, he died. His death came at the moment when Mongol armies stood deeper inside Europe than ever before. Once again, conquest had been interrupted by succession. Ögedei's widow, Temujin Khatun, took control as regent. She was politically skilled, determined, and prepared to remove officials who threatened her plans. Her goal was to secure the throne for her son Gayuk. The empire had been created by men on horseback, but its future repeatedly depended on women who controlled households, alliances, and access to the next Khan. Temujin delayed the Kurultai until enough support could be gathered. Rival branches resisted. Batu, now the most powerful prince in the west, had a bitter relationship with Gayuk. During the European campaign, the two had quarreled publicly. Gayuk had insulted Batu's status, and Ögedei had rebuked his son. In 1246, a great assembly finally elected Gayuk as Great Khan. Envoys from across Eurasia attended, including the Franciscan friar John of Plano Carpini, sent by Pope Innocent IV. The Europeans hoped to understand the Mongols and perhaps persuade them to stop attacking Christian lands. The Mongols interpreted diplomacy differently. To them, heaven had granted rule to the house of Genghis Khan. Foreign rulers were not equal partners. They were potential subjects. Gayuk's response demanded submission from the Pope and the kings of Europe. Neither side understood the other's political language. Gayuk's reign was short. He moved west in 1248, possibly preparing to confront Batu. Before the confrontation occurred, Gayuk died. The empire again had no great Khan. This time, the struggle would change which branch of Genghis Khan's family controlled the throne. The person who did the most to shape the next succession was Sorgatani Beki, widow of Talyui and mother of 4 sons, Möngke, Kublai, Hulagu, and Erik Bok. Sorgatani was one of the most capable political figures in Mongol history. A member of the Kharait royal family and a Christian of the Church of the East, she governed the territories assigned to her household with discipline. She cultivated officials, protected economic resources, and built alliances carefully. After Gayuk's death, Batu supported Sorgatani's eldest son Möngke for the position of Great Khan. The alliance between the Jochid and Talyuid branches isolated the descendants of Ögedei and Chagatai. In 1251, Möngke was elected. His opponents challenged the process. A plot against the new ruler was discovered or alleged. Purges followed. Princes and officials from rival branches were executed, dismissed, or reduced in power. The empire remained united on the map. Inside the royal family, trust was disappearing. Möngke was a serious and energetic ruler. He ordered censuses and tax reforms, attempted to control abuses, and demanded that imperial campaigns continue. He assigned enormous responsibilities to his brothers. Kublai would lead expansion in China. Hulagu would move west. The 2 campaigns would extend Mongol power to its greatest reach. They would also help break the empire apart. Hulagu left Mongolia with a massive army drawn from different parts of the empire. His mission was to secure Mongol authority across Iran, destroy the Nizari Ismaili strongholds, force the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad to submit, and continue toward Syria, if possible. The Nizari Ismailis had built a network of mountain fortresses in Iran and Syria. Their enemies in Europe often called them the Assassins, a name surrounded by legend and propaganda. They were known for targeted political killings, but the popular image of an all-powerful secret order is greatly exaggerated. Their fortresses were real, and some seemed almost impossible to capture. Hulagu used siege engineers, negotiation, and overwhelming pressure. In 1256, the Nizari leader surrendered. Many fortresses were dismantled. The political power of the Nizari state in Iran was broken. Then Hulagu turned toward Baghdad. For 5 centuries, Baghdad had been the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Caliph no longer ruled the enormous empire once governed by his ancestors, but the city remained one of the great intellectual, religious, and commercial centers of the Islamic world. Its ruler, Caliph al-Mustasim, underestimated the danger. Messages passed between the Caliph and Hulagu. Hulagu demanded submission and assistance. The Caliph refused or failed to respond in a way the Mongols accepted. Advisors offered conflicting counsel. Baghdad's defenses had declined. The Caliph appears to have believed that the symbolic authority of his office, the city's reputation, or support from the wider Muslim world would protect him. Nothing protected him. In early 1258, Hulagu's forces approached from several directions. They included Mongols and troops from subject or allied peoples, including Christian forces from the Caucasus and siege specialists from East Asia and the Islamic world. The city was surrounded. Mongol engineers built earthworks, used siege engines, and blocked escape routes. Abbasid forces attempted a sortie and were defeated. Flooded ground trapped many soldiers. The walls were breached. Baghdad surrendered in February 1258. What followed was a massacre. Medieval sources give wildly different death tolls, many of them impossibly large. No exact number can be recovered. The destruction, however, was undeniable. Residents were killed. Buildings were looted. Libraries, markets, mosques, palaces, and homes suffered. Some communities and specialists were protected, while others were devastated. The Caliph was executed. Later stories claimed he was wrapped in a carpet and trampled by horses so that royal blood would not touch the earth. The detail cannot be confirmed with confidence, but the political fact is certain. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad had ended. The fall of the city became one of the most powerful symbols of the Mongol conquests. It is often described as the sudden end of an entire golden age. History was more complicated. Islamic scholarship, art, and science continued in many places, including under later Mongol rulers. Baghdad itself eventually recovered part of its life. But the shock was real. A city that had once stood at the center of a world empire had been conquered by descendants of nomads from the distant steppe. Hulagu advanced into Syria. Aleppo fell after resistance. Damascus surrendered. Mongol influence now reached toward the Mediterranean. Christian rulers in the region made different choices. Some allied with the Mongols, hoping they might destroy Muslim powers. Others feared them as a threat to everyone. The next great target was Egypt, ruled by the Mamluks. Then news arrived from the east. Möngke Khan was dead. He had died in 1259 while campaigning against the southern Song in China. The cause is uncertain, with sources suggesting disease or other possibilities. His death stopped the western advance at a critical moment. Hulagu withdrew much of his army toward Iran to participate in the succession struggle. He left a smaller force in Syria under the general Kitbuka. The Mamluks recognized the opportunity. Their sultan, Qutuz, and commander Baybars marched from Egypt. The remaining Mongol force moved south. In September 1260, the armies met at Ain Jalut in the Jezreel Valley. The Mamluks used tactics familiar to steppe warfare, including controlled withdrawal and ambush. The battle was hard fought. Kitbuka was captured and killed. The Mongols were defeated. Ain Jalut did not destroy Mongol power in the Middle East. Hulagu's descendants continued to rule Iran and repeatedly fought for Syria. But the battle stopped the immediate expansion into Egypt and proved that a major Mongol army could be defeated in open battle. The line of conquest had reached a limit. More importantly, Hulagu could not simply return with the full united power of the empire. The Mongols were beginning to fight one another. Bata had died in 1255. Leadership of the Golden Horde eventually passed to his brother Berk, who had converted to Islam. Berk was outraged by the destruction of Baghdad, but religion was only part of the conflict. The Golden Horde and Hulagu's new state, the Ilkhanate, also competed for territory in the Caucasus and control of trade routes. War broke out between Berk and Hulagu. For the first time, large Mongol armies fought one another as rulers of rival states. The empire founded by Genghis Khan had conquered civilizations from China to Persia. Now its descendants were spilling one another's blood over the inheritance. The death of Möngke created an even larger crisis. Kublai was campaigning in China. Erik Bok remained near the Mongol homeland and Karakorum, where traditionalists supported him. Both brothers were declared Great Khan by rival assemblies. Civil war began. Erik Bok controlled the symbolic heartland. Kublai controlled richer agricultural territories and access to Chinese resources. That difference became decisive. Armies could ride on loyalty, but they still needed food. Kublai cut supply routes and used the wealth of northern China to sustain his forces. Erik Bok struggled with shortages and defections. In 1264, he surrendered. Kublai had won. But the title of Great Khan no longer meant what it had meant under Genghis or Ögedei. The Golden Horde acted independently. Hulagu's Ilkhanate ruled Iran and neighboring lands. The Chagatai territories in Central Asia followed their own political struggles. Kaidu, a powerful descendant of Ögedei, rejected Kublai's authority and fought him for decades. The Mongol Empire had not vanished. It had become several Mongol empires. Kublai focused on China. Unlike Genghis Khan, who had been formed almost entirely by steppe politics, Kublai spent much of his career governing settled populations. He employed Chinese advisors, supported agriculture, built institutions, and presented himself as a legitimate emperor in the Chinese tradition. In 1271, he formally declared the Yuan dynasty. His capital was established at Dadu, on the site of modern Beijing. To the Mongols, it was also known as Khanbalik, the city of the Khan. Kublai's court became one of the most cosmopolitan in the medieval world. Mongol princes, Chinese officials, Tibetan Buddhist clergy, Muslim administrators, Central Asian merchants, European travelers, Korean envoys, artists, doctors, and astronomers moved through its halls. But Kublai still had one enormous task before him. The southern Song dynasty remained unconquered. The Song ruled one of the wealthiest and most populous regions on Earth. Its cities were large. Its economy was sophisticated. Its navy defended rivers and coasts. Its armies possessed gunpowder weapons, crossbows, fortifications, and deep supply networks. The conquest would take years. The struggle centered for a long time on the fortified cities of Xiangyang and Fancheng, which protected access along the Han River toward the Yangtze. The defenders resisted from 1268 until 1273. Mongol forces used a blockade, naval operations, and powerful counterweight trebuchets built with the help of engineers from the Islamic world. When Xianyang fell, the road into the Song heartland opened. Yuan forces advanced along rivers with a growing navy. The Song capital surrendered in 1276, but loyalists continued resistance in the south. The final confrontation came in 1279 at the naval battle of Yamen. The remaining Song fleet was defeated. According to tradition, a loyal official took the child emperor in his arms and leaped into the sea rather than surrender. The Song dynasty ended. For the first time in centuries, all of China was ruled by one dynasty. And that dynasty had been founded by the grandson of Genghis Khan. Kublai had achieved what his grandfather never did. He had conquered the south. Victory, however, changed the Mongols as much as it changed China. The Yuan rulers adopted many Chinese imperial practices, but they did not simply become Chinese emperors in the same way earlier conquest dynasties had. They preserved a privileged place for Mongols and many Central and West Asians. Society was organized through status categories that generally placed Mongols above other groups, with people from northern China and the former southern Song population treated differently. These divisions created resentment. Kublai relied heavily on non-Chinese administrators in some offices because they depended on the dynasty and were less connected to local elite networks. Muslim officials played major roles in taxation, finance, astronomy, medicine, and trade. Tibetan Buddhism received powerful imperial support. Confucian scholars were used, but did not always enjoy the influence they had held under the Song. The Yuan state issued paper money and attempted to regulate commerce across a huge territory. Paper currency was not new in China, but the Mongols expanded its imperial role. When managed well, it helped trade. When overissued in later reigns, it contributed to inflation and distrust. Kublai repaired canals, supported grain transport, and maintained the postal system. Grain moved from southern China toward the capital. Roads and stations connected Dadu with the wider Mongol world. Foreign visitors described astonishing wealth. The most famous was Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant whose account claimed that he spent years in Kublai's service. Historians continue to debate parts of his story and the exact role he played, but his description introduced generations of European readers to a powerful and sophisticated empire in Asia. To those readers, Kublai's realm seemed almost impossible. Cities larger than anything in Europe, paper money accepted by imperial command, roads filled with messengers, and a ruler whose authority stretched across the horizon. Yet Kublai was not satisfied with China. He attempted to extend Yuan authority across East and Southeast Asia. Korea had been forced into submission after decades of Mongol invasion and resistance. Its royal family became closely tied to the Yuan through marriage. Korean ships, sailors, and resources were then used in Mongol campaigns. Japan was one of the most famous targets. Kublai sent messages demanding submission. The Japanese government refused to accept his authority. In 1274, a Mongol-led invasion force sailed from Korea, attacked islands, and landed at Hakata Bay. The invaders used coordinated formations and explosive projectiles unfamiliar to many Japanese defenders. Samurai warfare emphasized individual reputation in close combat, while the Yuan forces fought in organized groups. The invasion did not establish a secure foothold. After fighting near the coast, the fleet withdrew. A storm damaged ships, though the exact role of weather in ending the campaign remains debated. Kublai tried again in 1281 with a far larger operation involving fleets from Korea and southern China. The Japanese had built defensive walls and prepared. Coordination between the invading fleets was poor. Disease, delay, resistance, and finally a powerful typhoon devastated the expedition. Later Japanese tradition called the storms kamikaze, the divine wind. The legend became stronger than the complicated campaign behind it. Kublai also sent armies into Vietnam. Mongol and Yuan forces captured capitals but struggled against heat, disease, supply problems, and determined resistance. Vietnamese commanders avoided destruction, withdrew, and attacked when the invaders weakened. In 1288, at the Bac Dang River, Vietnamese forces used hidden stakes and tidal conditions to trap and destroy a Yuan fleet. Campaigns against Burma and Java also brought limited or temporary results. The Mongol military system that had dominated the open steppe and northern plains faced greater difficulty in tropical forests, humid climates, mountainous terrain, and distant seas. The empire had reached environments where mobility no longer guaranteed control. Kublai's failed expeditions consumed money and lives. They also revealed a deeper truth. The Mongols had conquered the world best suited to the horse. Beyond it, their advantage began to fade. While Kublai ruled from Dadu, the western descendants of Genghis Khan were building states with identities of their own. The Golden Horde controlled the steppe north of the Black Sea and the Caspian, the lower Volga, and authority over much of the Rus. Its rulers were descendants of Jochi. Its armies remained mobile, but its cities became centers of trade and government. Sarai, the Khan's capital on the Volga, connected worlds that Europeans often imagined as separate. Merchants arrived from Italian colonies on the Black Sea, from Islamic lands, from Central Asia, and from the Rus principalities. Slaves, furs, grain, wax, metal, textiles, horses, and luxury goods moved through its markets. The Golden Horde was not simply a foreign camp sitting above Russia. Over time, its Mongol elite mixed with Turkic-speaking populations of the western steppe. Language, religion, and culture changed. The ruling dynasty remained descended from Genghis Khan, but the state became increasingly Turkic and, under later rulers, Islamic. Berk's conversion to Islam did not immediately transform the entire realm. It did create a new political connection with Muslim powers, including the Mamluks of Egypt. Berk and Hulagu were already rivals. Shared religion made an alliance between the Golden Horde and the Mamluks easier. Mongol diplomacy now crossed the same frontiers Mongol armies had created. The Golden Horde's relationship with the Rus was harsh but flexible. The Khans demanded tribute and recognition. They could punish rebellion with terrifying force. Yet they also allowed local dynasties and the Orthodox Church to continue. Religious institutions received privileges at different times. Princes competed for patents of authority from the Khan. This competition changed the balance among Rus cities. Moscow was not yet the obvious center of a future Russian state. Its princes gradually increased their influence, in part by serving as effective collectors of tribute for the horde and using their position against rivals. Cooperation with Mongol power could be morally uncomfortable and politically profitable at the same time. The horde's supremacy weakened slowly, not in a single moment. Internal succession struggles divided the ruling family. Regional leaders gained independence. Trade shifted. Plague and warfare damaged cities. In 1380, a coalition led by Prince Dmitry of Moscow defeated forces associated with the powerful warlord Mamai at the Battle of Kulikovo. The victory became a major symbol of resistance, but it did not immediately end Mongol domination. Soon afterward, Toktamish reunited much of the Golden Horde and burned Moscow in 1382. Then another conqueror entered the story. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, came from Central Asia and claimed connection to the legacy of Genghis Khan, though he was not a direct male-line descendant. Because the title of Khan belonged to the lineage of Genghis, Timur ruled through puppet Khans and marriage ties while presenting himself as the great commander. Toktamish and Timur became enemies. In the late 14th century, Timur's campaigns devastated major centers of the Golden Horde. The state survived, but its unity was badly damaged. Over time, it divided into successor khanates, including Kazan, Crimea, Astrakhan, and others. Some survived for centuries. The Crimean Khanate endured until the late 18th century under Ottoman protection. The empire of Genghis Khan was fading from the map. His bloodline remained a source of legitimacy. In Iran, Hulagu founded the Ilkhanate. The title suggested a subordinate Khan, but in reality the Ilkhans ruled independently. Their territory included Iran, Iraq, parts of Anatolia, the Caucasus, and neighboring regions. At first, many of the ruling elite followed steppe traditions, Buddhism, or Christianity. The population they governed was overwhelmingly Muslim. This created tension, but it also produced one of the most remarkable cultural transformations in Mongol history. Hulagu and his successors used Persian administrators because they needed the skills of people who understood taxation, agriculture, cities, and written government. Persian political traditions entered the Mongol court. Mongol rulers adopted aspects of Iranian kingship. Scholars wrote histories that connected the new dynasty to the civilizations it had conquered. The Ilkhanate remained at war with the Mamluks and often sought alliances with Christian Europe. Letters traveled to popes and kings proposing joint attacks against common enemies. European rulers imagined that the Mongols might become powerful allies in a new crusade. Nothing lasting came from these hopes. The Ilkhans launched repeated campaigns into Syria. They sometimes won temporary victories, but failed to hold the region permanently. The Mamluks defended their state and controlled the approaches to Egypt. In 1295, the Ilkhan Ghazan converted to Islam and made it central to his rule. His conversion did not erase Mongol identity. It showed how completely the conquerors were adapting to the societies they governed. Ghazan and his minister Rashid al-Din attempted reforms. They sought to control corruption, regulate taxation, restore agriculture, and strengthen administration. Rashid al-Din also supervised the creation of one of the great historical works of the medieval world, the Jami al-Tawarik, often called the Compendium of Chronicles. It attempted something extraordinary, a history not only of the Mongols, but of many peoples known to the court. Chinese, Persian, Islamic, Biblical, Turkic, and Mongol traditions entered a single project. The empire that had moved artisans by force also moved stories, images, scientific knowledge, and historical memory. Ilkhanid courts supported manuscript painting, architecture, astronomy, medicine, and scholarship. Chinese artistic influences appeared in Persian works. Iranian techniques traveled east. The violence of conquest and the creativity of cultural exchange belonged to the same period. Neither cancels the other. After the death of Abu Sa'idi in 1335 without a secure heir, the Ilkhanate fragmented. Rival families competed. Regional dynasties took control. The unified Mongol state in Iran disappeared. But Persian culture had transformed its conquerors. The descendants of Hulagu had arrived as rulers from the steppe. They ended as kings of Iran. In Central Asia, the Ögedei Khanate faced a different struggle. Its lands stretched across regions containing both nomadic pastures and wealthy oasis cities. The interests of steppe aristocrats did not always match those of merchants, farmers, and urban administrators. Some rulers defended traditional Mongol customs. Others converted to Islam and moved closer to the culture of their subjects. The Khanate repeatedly divided between eastern and western regions. Kaidu, a grandson of Ögedei, built power in Central Asia and resisted Kublai for decades. To Kaidu and his supporters, Kublai had moved too far into the Chinese world. The conflict was not only a personal rivalry. It was a struggle over what the empire should become. Was the great Khan still the ruler of a universal steppe empire? Or had he become the emperor of China? Kaidu's armies fought Kublai's forces across Central Asia. He supported rebellions and competing princes. His resistance prevented Kublai from restoring control over the Western Khanates. One figure associated with Kaidu's world became famous through later storytelling, his daughter Kublai. Sources describe her as strong, politically important, and skilled in wrestling. Marco Polo claimed she would marry only a man who could defeat her, and that unsuccessful suitors lost horses to her. The tale may be embellished, but Kublai's reputation reflects a broader reality. Elite Mongol women could ride, manage property, command households, influence succession, and sometimes participate directly in political and military affairs. Women had been essential from the beginning. Hulagu kept Temujin's abandoned family alive. Borte anchored his ruling household and advised him. Temujin governed the empire. Sorghutani shaped the succession that placed her sons at the center of Eurasia. The history of the Mongol Empire cannot be understood as the work of warriors alone. Behind every campaign stood families, herds, camps, administrators, and women whose decisions determined which prince received support. As the Khanates separated politically, they remained connected economically and culturally. Merchants could still travel across large parts of Eurasia under Mongol protection. Diplomatic missions crossed from European courts to Asia. Artisans, scholars, missionaries, and adventurers moved between regions. This period is often called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. The phrase can be misleading. There was no universal peace. Mongol states fought one another. Rebellions erupted. Bandits threatened roads. Conquered populations remembered massacres and continued paying heavy taxes. Yet compared with the fractured political landscape before the conquests, the Mongol age created a broad zone in which movement across Eurasia became easier for those with protection and resources. The relay network allowed messages to move rapidly. Imperial passes gave travelers authority. Merchants received investment from Mongol elites through partnerships. Caravan routes were guarded because trade produced revenue. Goods moved great distances. Chinese silk and porcelain traveled west. Precious metals, textiles, horses, spices, glass, and other products moved through imperial markets. Techniques and ideas crossed with them. Medical knowledge circulated. Astronomers compared traditions. Maps grew more informed. Diplomatic contacts increased between societies that had previously known one another mainly through rumor. Religious exchange also intensified. Franciscan missionaries traveled east. Armenian and Georgian Christians served Mongol rulers. Church of the East communities existed across Central Asia and China. Muslim merchants and administrators worked throughout the empire. Tibetan Buddhist leaders gained influence at the Yuan court. Taoist and Buddhist figures debated under Mongol supervision. The Khans did not create religious harmony in a modern sense. They created a political space where many religions competed for imperial favor. A ruler might invite representatives of several traditions and ask each to pray for his health or victory. The empire was willing to use every road to heaven. Knowledge moved with people, but so did disease. In the 14th century, plague spread across Eurasia and became the Black Death. Scholars continue to study its precise origins and routes. Trade networks and military movement under the Mongol successor states likely helped connect regions through which disease traveled, though no single empire or people can be blamed for the biological catastrophe. The same roads that carried silk could carry infection. Connection brought wealth. Connection also brought vulnerability. By the time Kublai Khan died in 1294, the dream of a single empire had largely ended. He remained the most powerful Mongol ruler, but the Western Khans did not accept his practical authority. His successors in China inherited a great dynasty and enormous problems. The Yuan court faced financial pressure from failed wars, expensive construction, palace politics, and the cost of maintaining a privileged ruling structure. Successions became unstable. Several emperors ruled for only short periods. Factions formed around imperial relatives, ministers, military commanders, and religious institutions. Natural disasters made political weakness more dangerous. The Yellow River changed course and flooded. Harvests failed in some regions. Disease struck. Tax demands and forced labor created anger. Local officials abused power. The government attempted repairs and relief, but corruption and instability reduced its effectiveness. Rebellion spread. The Red Turban movement drew strength from religious belief, economic misery, and opposition to Yuan rule. Different rebel leaders fought both the dynasty and one another. Among them rose Zhu Yuanzhang, a man born into poverty who had spent time as a Buddhist novice and rebel soldier. His life contained an echo of Temujin's. Another abandoned and desperate man was rising through a collapsing world. Zhu defeated rival rebels, built an administration, and advanced north. In 1368, he declared the Ming dynasty. Yuan Emperor Togon Timur fled Dadu toward the steppe. The Mongols had lost China. They did not disappear. The northern Yuan continued in Mongolia. Mongol forces remained a serious threat to Ming frontiers. The memory of imperial rule survived, and later leaders repeatedly attempted to reunite the steppe. But the dynasty founded by Kublai no longer controlled the cities and fields that had financed its power. In less than a century, the Mongols had conquered all of China. In less than another century, they had been driven out. The political unity of the Mongol Empire was gone, but its consequences were everywhere. In Europe, rulers built stronger stone defenses and studied reports of Mongol warfare. In the Islamic world, new dynasties rose from the ruins of older powers. In China, the Ming inherited institutions, routes, and a capital shaped by Yuan rule. In Russia, the long relationship with the Golden Horde influenced taxation, diplomacy, warfare, and the rise of Moscow. Across Central Asia, Mongol and Turkic identities blended in new ways. Even those who defeated the Mongols often ruled inside a world the Mongols had transformed. The empire's military reputation became so powerful that myth grew around it. The Mongols were sometimes described as an endless horde, winning only because they possessed more men than their enemies. Often, the opposite was true. They frequently invaded states with larger populations and greater total resources. Their advantage came from organization, intelligence, mobility, command, and the ability to concentrate force at the right moment. A Mongol army did not move as one crowded mass. It spread across the landscape, allowing horses to graze and scouts to search. Separate columns could travel on parallel routes, communicating through messengers. Before battle, commanders attempted to understand the enemy's alliances, leadership, and terrain. They used local rivalries as weapons. Against the Jin, they recruited defectors from within the dynasty. Against Khwarezm, they exploited the Shah's decision to divide his forces. In the Caucasus, they separated the Cumans from the Alans. In Europe, they prevented armies in Poland and Hungary from joining. In China, they incorporated engineers, sailors, and officials from conquered populations. The Mongols did not conquer because they remained unchanged. They conquered because they changed faster than their enemies expected. They learned siege warfare from people who had spent generations attacking walls. They built fleets with the labor and knowledge of maritime societies. They governed through Persian administrators, Chinese bureaucrats, Uyghur scribes, Muslim financiers, and local princes. Their empire was Mongol at the top, but it functioned through the abilities of many peoples. This adaptability had limits. The farther Mongol rulers moved from the steppe, the more their interests changed. A Khan ruling China needed grain taxes, canals, and Chinese officials. A Khan ruling Iran needed Persian administrators and relationships with Muslim elites. A Khan ruling the western steppe depended on Volga trade, Rus tribute, and Turkic warriors. They shared ancestors. They no longer shared the same political world. The family system that had helped Genghis Khan distribute responsibility also encouraged fragmentation. Sons and grandsons expected territories and followers. Each branch built its own power base. The office of Great Khan depended on agreement among princes who had armies of their own. As long as one ruler possessed overwhelming prestige, the system could hold. After Möngke's death, no one did. Kublai defeated Erik Bok, but victory over his brother could not force distant cousins to obey. Berke and Hulagu went to war. Kaidu rejected Kublai. The title of Great Khan remained magnificent, but it could not command a family that had become a continent. The Mongols had solved the problem of conquering distance. They never fully solved the problem of inheriting it. Their legacy remains difficult because it contains truths that seem to contradict one another. The conquests caused mass death. Cities were destroyed. Populations were displaced. Fields and irrigation systems suffered. Political and cultural centers collapsed. The terror was not an invention of hostile chroniclers, even when those chroniclers exaggerated numbers. At the same time, Mongol rule connected regions on an unprecedented scale. Trade expanded. Diplomatic contact increased. Artists and scholars crossed borders. Technologies and knowledge traveled. Courts became places where traditions from East Asia, Central Asia, the Islamic world, and Europe could meet. The empire destroyed roads to the past and opened roads across the world. It is tempting to judge the Mongols only through the image of Genghis Khan as either a monster or a visionary. He was neither simple image. To the peoples whose cities were attacked, he could represent catastrophe. To followers raised from obscurity, he could represent opportunity and justice within a harsh world. To modern Mongolia, he became a founder who united the nation. To medieval enemies, he became punishment given human form. He rewarded loyalty, protected envoys, accepted religious diversity, and promoted talent beyond old aristocratic boundaries. He also ordered campaigns that killed and displaced vast numbers of people. Both belong to the same man. The empire's reputation for religious tolerance also requires care. Mongol courts allowed many beliefs and often protected clergy. Yet the same armies could destroy religious buildings during a siege. Tolerance served imperial stability. It did not guarantee safety from war. Their law could be disciplined, but it was not gentle. Their trade routes could be protected, but many had first been opened through conquest. Their peace stood on the memory of terror. The Mongols understood something every empire eventually learns. Fear can create obedience quickly, but fear alone cannot collect taxes, repair canals, settle disputes, or choose a peaceful successor. For those tasks, conquerors needed the conquered. That dependence transformed the ruling family. In China, Kublai became an emperor surrounded by ceremony and bureaucracy. In Iran, the Ilkhans became Muslim Persian kings. In the Golden Horde, Mongol rulers became part of a Turkic Islamic world. In Central Asia, descendants of Genghis Khan ruled through cultures their ancestors had once approached as outsiders. The conquerors were absorbed without entirely disappearing. Their names survived in dynasties, titles, genealogies, and political claims. For centuries, descent from Genghis Khan could make a ruler legitimate across much of Eurasia. Men who lacked that bloodline sometimes married into it or ruled through a descendant who carried the title of Khan. The empire had become a memory powerful enough to govern the living. And then there was Genghis Khan's missing grave. Armies searched for his enemies across continents. Messengers carried his commands thousands of miles. Chroniclers recorded his victories in Persian, Chinese, Mongolian, Arabic, Latin, and other languages. Yet the final resting place of the man who changed Eurasia remains unknown. No confirmed chamber filled with treasure has been opened. No inscription has ended the debate. The mountain and steppe have kept their silence. Perhaps the mystery survives because people continue searching for a final answer to his life. Was he driven by revenge for the humiliations of childhood? By a belief that eternal heaven had chosen him? By the logic of the steppe, where a leader who stopped expanding risked losing followers? By the need to punish betrayal? By ambition without limit? The evidence suggests all of these forces may have mattered at different times. No single explanation can contain him. Temujin began as a child inside a broken family. His father's followers abandoned him because they believed he had no power. He spent the rest of his life building a system in which abandonment became difficult and disobedience became deadly. He broke tribes apart and rebuilt them around himself. He turned personal loyalty into military structure. He took the survival skills of the steppe and organized them with the precision of a state. Then he directed that state outward. When he died, his descendants inherited an idea larger than any border, that the house of Genghis Khan had been given the right to rule the world. Ögedei carried that idea into Europe. Bata made it permanent along the Volga. Möngke attempted to restore discipline at the center. Hulagu carried it to Baghdad. Kublai transformed it into a Chinese dynasty. Each success made unity more difficult. The empire became too large for one court, too wealthy for one branch of the family to surrender, and too culturally diverse to remain politically identical from Beijing to the Black Sea. Its greatest strength created its greatest weakness. The Mongols could adapt to every civilization they conquered. Eventually, they adapted away from one another. By the end of the 14th century, no single ruler commanded the old empire. Yet Mongol successor states still shaped politics from Eastern Europe to China. Caravans still followed routes secured during their age. Courts still claimed descent from their house. Enemies still planned around the possibility of their return. The empire had fallen apart. The world it created had not. The rise of the Mongols also changed how distant peoples imagined the planet. Before the conquests, Europe, the Islamic world, Central Asia, and East Asia were connected, but information often traveled slowly through many intermediaries. Under Mongol rule, envoys and merchants crossed greater distances with fewer political borders. Europeans learned that beyond the Islamic powers they knew stood enormous states in Asia. Chinese courts received visitors from lands once understood only vaguely. Persian historians attempted global narratives. Maps and travel accounts became filled with new places. This did not create the modern world by itself, but it made Eurasia more aware of its own scale. The Mongol Empire was a bridge built by an army, and every bridge carries movement in both directions. Silk traveled west. Silver traveled east. Engineers carried machines. Clergy carried faith. Physicians carried treatments. Envoys carried threats. Refugees carried memories. Fleas and disease moved with animals and people. No one controlled every consequence, not even the Khans. That may be the final lesson of the empire. Genghis Khan believed power could be organized. He proved that scattered tribes could become a force capable of defeating the greatest states of the age. His descendants proved that conquest could connect an entire continent. But no ruler could command what those connections would ultimately produce. The Mongols opened routes for wealth, knowledge, and diplomacy. Those routes also spread rebellion, rivalry, and disease. They created successor states that no longer obeyed the center. They raised local elites who learned to rule without them. The empire changed the world beyond the control of the family that created it. Centuries later, the image of the Mongol rider still appears through dust and legend. Bow in hand, several horses moving beside him, the horizon open, the next kingdom unaware. But the real power of the Mongols was never simply the rider. It was the scout days ahead of him, the messenger changing horses at a relay station, the engineer assembling a siege machine learned from another civilization, the translator standing between rulers who did not share a language, the woman arranging the alliance that would choose the next Khan, the administrator calculating how much grain could be collected without emptying the land, the merchant trusting that an imperial pass might carry him across a continent. The Mongol Empire was not one army moving forever west. It was a system built from movement, fear, talent, and adaptation. And systems can outlive the people who create them. When the kingdoms of Europe saw Mongol riders in 1241, they believed an unknown people had appeared from the edge of the world. They were wrong. The Mongols did not come from outside history. They came from generations of steppe politics, old trade routes, climate, family rivalry, and the struggle to survive. Their methods drew on centuries of nomadic warfare. Their empire grew by absorbing the knowledge of everyone it defeated. What was new was the scale. One child's fight for survival had become a continental order. The boy who searched riverbanks for food became the ruler whose envoys addressed kings as future subjects. The captive wearing a wooden collar created a dynasty that placed emperors, khans, generals, queens, and governors across Eurasia. Yet he could not protect his descendants from the oldest enemy of every ruling family, one another. The Mongol Empire did not end because its warriors suddenly forgot how to fight. It ended because different branches wanted different futures, because ruling China was not the same as ruling Iran, because the wealth of cities changed nomadic conquerors, because succession invited civil war, because local cultures were stronger than a single imperial identity, because every victory created another frontier that had to be supplied, taxed, defended, and inherited. The empire conquered more land than any previous contiguous state, but it could not conquer division. And somewhere beneath the grasslands of Mongolia, perhaps beneath trees, stone, or soil no one has recognized, lies the man who began it all. No palace marks the place. No army guards it. The wind moves across the steppe as it did before his birth. Horses still cross the land where his family once searched for food. The cities he conquered have risen, fallen, and risen again. The dynasties he destroyed are remembered in books. The kingdoms founded by his descendants have vanished from modern maps. But the distance between east and west has never felt quite the same. Genghis Khan did not conquer the entire world. He made the world impossible to keep apart. History remembers the speed of the Mongol victories. It remembers the burning cities, the falling walls, and the rulers who fled before the horsemen arrived. But the deeper story is what happened after the dust settled. The conquerors became governors. The governors became rivals. The rivals became kings of different civilizations. And the empire that once seemed unstoppable was divided by the family meant to preserve it. From an abandoned child on the banks of the Onan River to the fall of Baghdad, the conquest of China, the terror of Europe, and the birth of 4 rival khanates, the Mongol story was never only about destruction. It was about the terrible power of unity and the unavoidable price of division. If history's greatest empires, forgotten wars, and the decisions that changed the world are the stories you want to keep exploring, subscribe and join us for the next journey into the past. Was the Mongol Empire's greatest achievement the world it conquered,